So hello everyone, and we are very happy to be back after a short break to explore how brands can make a positive impact on people's lives. This can of course be through great communication or great experiences or great products. So we're going to have a look at some of our research from around the world to see what it takes to make this happen. But before we go into the details of our agenda, Simon in London and Chris in Nashville will update us on the current context, as usual. So we're going to see what our latest public opinion data shows, and we will look at how behaviors and moods differ across countries and also across demographic groups. After that, we will go over to Cincinnati with Jill, who will present women in advertising, and we will see how portraying women in a positive way benefits brands as well as society. Then Catherine in Cape Town will talk about how important it is, especially today, after what we've all gone through, that brands actually deliver on promises. And at last, we will focus on Brazil with Cynthia, who will be joining us in São Paulo, has joined us already, and we will explore the leading role that women influencers have in Brazil and what this means for brands. And with that, I'm happy to turn over to Simon.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you, everybody, for being with us today. So just to set the scene, I've selected 4 reports that we've published since we were last together, which I hope in some way help shed some light on the current context that we're all going through. And my first is around consumer confidence. Our latest release notes the spread of the Delta variant, unfortunately, and it also notes that global consumer confidence is frozen and hasn't really moved much over the last quarter. And a parallel study, I think, sheds some light on perhaps where people's heads are. 73% saying it's going to be at least 2 more years for my country's economy to recover. And those themes around the timeline that we're all living through, and indeed what's happening in my country, are ones which Chris will pick up on in just a moment. Second report focuses on COVID. Still the #1 worry facing the world for the 17th or 18th month in a row. And this month we find Australia joining the list of countries where the levels of concern are running at over 50%. And just if a reminder were needed of the fluid situation that we're going through, we see it in these numbers. Now, as Jennifer mentioned, we've had such an experience with the pandemic, and I think one of the vivid things it is shining light on is this question of what's global and what's local. And this study I thought was quite instructive because it showed most people saying expanding trade is a good thing, at least in principle, but at the same time, we're finding fewer people than before the pandemic saying that globalization is good for my country. And indeed, as the Malaysia and France examples show, those perspectives do vary very considerably when we travel from one place to another. So that global and local vibe remains a big thing for us to be looking at. Back to the global, we've got the world's leaders gathering next month for another climate change conference. And I highlighted this finding particularly from this international study that we have just released, because it showed people acknowledging, actually reflecting on the pandemic, that it shows that it is possible for behaviours to transform rapidly and raises those questions about what governments, businesses, and indeed ourselves can perhaps do in the light of extreme pressure. The other thing to mention, I think, on that one is that the number of people who are downgrading the importance of the environment remains rather small, even though COVID remains with us. So I leave with you the links to those reports, and you can go into the detail of each of those. And we're really delighted to have Chris with us again to pick up this story of how the mood is changing around the world, how the behaviours are changing, and what it might mean for brands who are looking to make the most of the opportunities and indeed deal with the challenges that they face. Chris, thanks so much for joining us again.
Of course, and thank you, Simon, and hello, everyone. Just a reminder to some of you who may be new to these webinars, Essentials is our global syndicated tracker that focuses on how people are adapting amidst this kind of period of prolonged uncertainty. So every other week, we go out and connect with 1,000 citizens in 16 major markets around the globe. And then we supplement that learning with a longitudinal ethnography. So I'll be pulling from both of those sources as I share some key learnings about how people are feeling and what people are doing. Now, many of you have seen this chart before, where we ask people to classify themselves into one of 8 groupings to best describe where they stand in their personal COVID recovery journey. Now, over time, as many of you know, this has been an elliptical story of advance and retreat, but of late, we are seeing some positive signs with more global citizens either opening up or restarting. You can see kind of the very positive change here just over the past month. But sometimes these global data points can obscure really big differences in specific markets or groups of markets. So for example, we're also seeing that in some countries like Japan, in Mexico, in South Africa, and in South Korea, there's a very similarly shaped recovery curve where a large majority of people are all adjusting and acclimating together in an almost uniform way. But in other countries, more distinct segments start to emerge. So in several European and North American markets, we see incredible symmetry in kind of these 3 humps in the data, right? There are those on the far right who have moved on and are resuming their pre-COVID activities. There are those in the middle who have acclimated to a life of adjusted routines. And there are those on the left who have some real uncertainty about what might come next. So these groups, as you can imagine, have very different mindsets when it comes to their willingness to re-engage. And one of the issues that creates some of that division is the vaccine. So I think in a lot of ways, these quotes from some of our ethnography participants really capture this. So Danielle really represents the majority out there. Once she got the vaccine, she went on to report much more confidence in being able to go out and do normal things with her family. But she was a little bit hesitant jumping in the first place. But then there's somebody like Chanel in the United States who's conveying real skepticism in a government that would be so insistent in pushing the vaccine. She's saying, why is that? And then there is Amber from the UK, who's expressing some real concerns about the effects that the vaccine might have. So we're going to come back to this theme of vaxxers and anti-vaxxers in just a moment, but let's take a quick excursion to a few areas where we do see some encouraging signs. So we're going to talk about travel, indoor dining, and in-store shopping. And on each of the next 3 slides, you're going to look at the percentage of people that are engaging in a given activity now compared to those who see it as a large risk. And as we look at those patterns over time, you're going to see some really similar patterns. So first up is travel. And what you see here is that over the course of the year, a lot more people are willing to start taking trips again. And correspondingly, the percentage of people who think taking a vacation is a large risk is coming down kind of slowly but surely. Now, that does not mean people are ready to jump on international planes just yet. So 50% of our global sample still tells us that traveling to another country is a very high risk affair. So most of the trips people are taking are more kind of modest excursions to nearby destinations. The other thing that happens here is when we push people and say, well, hey, how normal did your last vacation feel? Only 16% say, that feels like we're entirely back to normal with the vacation. So a ways to go in terms of really getting to normal with this activity and restoring some distance to the travel. So now if we turn our attention to indoor dining, you see a very similar data pattern, right? So the perception of risk over the year has come down, 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 whereas the percentage of people who are re-engaging in the activity has doubled over the course of the year. If we turn to in-store shopping, very similar drill. The number of people who are engaging in the activity steadily increasing, the number of people who are perceiving large risk steadily decreasing. But let's go back to the vaccinators on this point and look at in-store shopping as a function of vaccination. So the first two groups are showing people who have either been vaccinated or are likely to be vaccinated soon. And you can see that in the past couple of months, their in-store shopping activity has gone up quite a bit. But what's really interesting on this slide is what's going on the far right. The point being, those unwilling to vaccinate, they haven't been vaccinated and they don't plan to, they continue to participate the most in this activity. Now, building on that theme then of the fully engaged anti-vaxxer, there are some dynamics that make things really challenging for governments, medical practitioners, even brands, especially in the United States. So what you can see here, I'm going back to my phases data, the blue line is representing people who have been vaccinated, the orange line is representing people who do not intend to ever be vaccinated. And look at what goes on the far right. So those who refuse the vaccine are actually 3 times more likely to fully engage in pre-COVID activities than their more cautious vaccinated counterparts. So given that type of dynamic, it's probably little wonder that people's view of a return to normal kind of keeps stretching out into the distance. So each month, some of you know, we ask people how long they think it's going to take before things feel like they're going to get back to normal. And I think in a lot of ways, this corresponds to the economic recovery data that Simon shared with you earlier. So this percentage of people that say it's going to be at least a year, it keeps going up. And then if you look at some of the quotes that we get from our ethnography participants, it kind of reinforces this notion of the no normal. It's like, yeah, I'm going out, but I'm not going to crowded clubs. And yeah, I'm taking a holiday, but we're not going with other families. And whenever I have to carry a vaccination card or have any type of form, it's just a reminder that we're living in very unusual times. So we're going to be talking about women in advertising in just a moment. So wanted to give a feel for how women and men kind of view this a little bit differently. What you can see here is that 2/3 of women globally feel like normal is at least a year away, which is a bit higher than men. It's still a big number, but you got 58% of men saying normal is at least a year out. Taking that theme a step further, we also asked people what they're feeling as they go through, kind of this prolonged period of uncertainty. And what we find is that women are more likely to say they're feeling frustrated, bored, a bit lonely, and fearful, whereas the guys are more likely to say they feel optimistic, calm, prepared, which is kind of consistent with what we just saw in terms of the anticipated time to normal. So here we are, a year and a half into this thing. And I think one of the concluding statements we can make is where you stand largely depends on where you sit geographically, right? So I think we've clearly shown that the way different countries are responding, there's uniformity in some countries, but there's division, segments, right, in others. And even as many of us resume modest travel, indoor dining, in-store shopping, it is increasingly apparent that a true return kind of to our former lives is an increasingly distant vision. And this is particularly true of the women that we've been surveying. So with that, thank you so much for your time, your attention. Always honored to get to visit with you all, and back over to you in the studio, Jennifer.
Thanks a lot, Chris. And a lot of what you talked about is about differences and divides. And I'd be very interested to hear your, and I'm sure everyone would be, your point of view in terms of someone living in the US, because I feel that there's a lot going on in terms of different segments of the population having very different attitudes and what this may mean for us working in different markets.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, just to recap a couple of the data points from earlier, compared to other large countries, there are more US citizens who are anti-vaxxers, right? So that's point one. But then point two, they are also much more assertive in their daily activities, right? So there's more of them, and they're more likely to really get out there and be active. So that's become yet another point of division for Americans, and it makes us that much more challenging to govern, to care for, even to market to, right? There was a time where it was actually possible to be an all-American brand, but with Americans kind of disagreeing on more and more issues and just basic facts, that is an increasingly challenging proposition. So it occurs to me that I'm not likely to be asked to join the USA Travel and Tourism Board, but hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Definitely something to take into account, that brands need to take into account. And thanking Chris, we are now going to open the floor to Jill, who is going to talk to us about how women are portrayed in advertising and what this leads to for brands.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here today to talk to you about our findings on women in advertising. So as you know, advertising and media play a real important role in our culture, as they really do tend to reflect our social norms of our society. They have the power to change the way we think about our gender roles and shape the way that we view one another. So with this consideration, is media and advertising doing enough to push gender equality? In a recent Ipsos study, we found that 76% of people agree that advertising does have the power to shape how we see each other. So with this importance people are placing on advertising, it's really vital that brands and marketers take responsibility to present women in a positive, modern manner to help shift our social norms as we push for gender equality. Brands should break away from keeping men and women in their traditional gender roles. We see a great example of this when an artist recreated an old Hardee's ad just by flipping the gender roles. And he did it to really turn sexism on its head and just highlight the absurdity of any gender inequality. And I think he does a really good job at this. It kind of forces viewers to kind of stop, look at these two images and just kind of think about it. So if advertising has the power to shape the way we see each other, what benefit, if any, is there for the brand in having this positive portrayal of women in their advertising? So to help answer this question, Ipsos included the gender equality measure. We included that question in all of our creative assessment research projects when a female character was present. The gender equality measure, also known as GEM, was developed to help quantify consumers' reactions towards treatment of women in advertising. So at Ipsos, we measured GEM in just under 2,000 ads across 10 markets to better understand if brands will benefit when there is that positive female representation in advertising. And we looked at how that GEM index intersects with some of Ipsos' key creative assessment measures. And here's what we found. So we did see that when an ad scores high on the GEM index, they are then the ads are 20% more likely to score high on choice intent, having an effect on consumers at the point of purchase, and an even greater impact on brand relationship at 35%. So this will increase how consumers feel about the brand in the long term. So this really presents an opportunity for brands. If they can present women in this positive, respectful manner, then they can increase how consumers feel about their brand in both the short term and the long term, showing us that a positive portrayal of women is good for brand growth. So not only is gender equality good for the brand, but we see here in this data point from The Economist that it's also good for a country's economy. So what we see here is they charted the health of an economy against the treatment of women in that country. So you can see there's a relationship. When a country is more extreme or non-progressive or has that unequal treatment of women in society, then they score high on the Fragile State Index, meaning that these countries with low or no gender equality have a highly fragile economy, showing us that not only is gender equality good for society, it's good for a country's prosperity. And as we saw on the previous slide, it can help build a stronger brand. In keeping with this idea of the economy, we understand that women have a purchasing power of a little under $32 trillion globally and are purchasing more than 50% of traditional male products. So it's important to make sure advertising, regardless of the category, are speaking to women, but also present them in a positive, respectful manner given their buying power and the impact for brand growth. We see here that some categories have more ads scoring high in that top third of the GEM database versus others. So to put this in perspective, let's use the Dove Real Beauty campaign as an example. It's been a real game changer for that brand. The brand messaging has been consistent, that it's been about building self-confidence and presenting women in this realistic fashion. And since that campaign launched, they've increased their sales by 62%. But more importantly, they have been changing society as they continue to push for building self-confidence in women and girls, and reinforcing the idea, that true beauty comes from within, and we really need to be more accepting of ourselves, regardless of our body's shape, size, or color. And I'd like to show an example of an ad from another company that is trying to change perceptions. It comes from a Nike campaign that ran in Russia called What Girls Are Made Of, and it adds a modern twist to a well-known children's song. So let's watch this ad.
Из чего же сделаны наши девчонки? Ла-ла-ла-ла-ла-ла-ла-ла-ла-ла-ла. Из цветочков, из звоночков, из переглядок и мармеладок сделаны наши девчонки. Из железа, из стремлений, из самоотдачи, из сражений сделаны наши девчонки. Из упорства, из красы, которой гордится вся нация, сделаны наши девчонки. Из синяков и тумаков, из отваги сжатых кулаков, из независимости и мастерства, из страсти и сердца, и достоинства, из воли крепче Кремля, из силы и огня, из свободы от чужих мнений, из свершений и достижений сделаны наши девчонки.
Jill, you're muted.
Thank you for that. So this campaign,
so you forgot to unmute.
Exactly. This campaign is a great example of a category that historically was targeted towards men and has taken the action to direct their advertising at women. And they just took an outdated song that had outdated thoughts from the past and flipped the script completely to show women and girls that they're just as strong and tough and confident and determined as anyone else, really pushing for that gender equality. So a couple thoughts I'd like to leave you with. If advertising can present women in a positive and respectful manner, then they can increase how consumers feel about their brand in both the short term and the long term. And we've seen that gender equality is not only good for brand growth, but it's also good for society. And it's important that advertising, regardless of the category, are speaking to women and presenting them in that positive, respectful manner, given their brand buying power. So at Ipsos, we will make a continued effort to help improve the gender representation in advertising. So we will continue to collect the GEM measure for every creative assessment, project where a female character is present. Thank you all for your time and your attention today. Jennifer?
Great, thanks, Jill. And just very quickly, you showed an amazing ad. I'm sure you've seen so many others. Is there one other one that you'd like to mention that was, seemed important for you in terms of portraying women?
Yeah, so there's one actually that Dove has as well. It's called the reverse selfie. And it's an ad and a movement really to help build self-confidence on social media platforms. So I have a daughter who will soon venture into the social media world. And so it's really comforting to know that there is a source and an advocate out there really pushing for that positive portrayal of the body image in young girls out there on the social media platforms.
Great. So a very personal interest because of your daughter. That's yes. Great. Thanks so much, Jill. And let's travel now to Cape Town, where we have Catherine with us. And Catherine will be talking about brand experience and about the importance of delivering on promises. Catherine, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. I'm really delighted to talk about delivering on promises today, particularly because there's a shifting focus in brand building, no doubt accelerated by the coronavirus pandemic, which sees brands experimenting with ways to connect with their customers through experiences. If you think about apps that allow you to try makeup colors on before you buy, brands that invite you to guess a new flavor or come up with your own new one, and games that allow you to buy virtual fashion brand skins for your avatar are just a few examples. Now, the role of good customer experience in driving business success is a hot topic today, especially so, as Chris mentioned earlier, how people are cautiously returning to some sense of normality, eating out and returning to in-store shopping, taking flights and traveling again. And during this fragile time, it's really important that brands deliver on what customers expect and they don't mess up. So I'm happy to share with you today some of the highlights of recent work we've done to understand the importance of customer experience in building strong brands. Now, I'd like to start with a quote from Walt Disney. I mean, he was an amazing man. And I just love this quote because it's really so simple and sums up the essence of delivering on promises. He said, "Do what you do so well that they will want to see it again and bring their friends." Now, of course, Disney here was talking about movies and entertainment, but there's so much in what he says here that we as people who are passionate about brands can learn. Do what you do is about delivering your product or service to your customers. Commitment theory explains how people form relationships and says that they form relationships with brands much like they do with family and friends. And the strength of that relationship can be deep and enduring, or it can be shallow and fleeting. The way people form relationships with brands is multifaceted and influenced in many different ways, some of which are out of a brand's control. If you think about what people say and do on social media, and also what other brands say and do. But what the brand says through their own communication and advertising, as Jill explained earlier, creates perceptions and expectations of what the brand will actually deliver. Now, these perceptions, together with what the brand does, and by this I mean the delivery of the product or service, are very much within a brand's own control. Our work has shown across various categories just how important good brand experiences are in building strong relationships. From banking to online shopping, telecommunications, and also in FMCG, we see that customer experience related attributes, as you can see here on the chart, are amongst the top drivers of choice, alongside the usual suspects like good value for money, trust, and high quality. But it's not always just about friendly staff or delivering a good service. It's also about making it clear to your customers what they can expect, giving them a sense of certainty, making them feel valued, and enabling them to enjoy the brand interaction. Do what you do so well is about how the brand delivers. And we've found that to keep customers happy and build solid relationships, brands really need to deliver on their promises. So what the brand says and what the brand does must be aligned, or we have seen in our work that relationships will erode or even fail completely over time. And with customer expectations at an all-time high, this is really not something that brands can afford to allow. Now, wanting to see it again is about building commitment. Much like personal relationships, the brands we love the most are the ones we want to spend more time with. What brands really need to do is to become the favorite so that customers will want to use the brand time and time above all other choices. Now, let's have a look at some data that shows the merits of doing this. Here, we have evidence in the value of building strong relationships. We know that not all customers are created equal. Those with strong relationships with brands are more likely to be brand advocates. And what we can see here is that they give exponentially more share of their category spend to that brand over others where the relationship is weaker. Another real highlight for me from our work is that we can see that strong relationships also insulate brands from mistakes. Now, what we mean by this is that customers with strong bonds are more likely to be advocates, even following a negative experience with the brand compared to those with a weak relationship. It's inevitable. Sometimes brands will mess up, but if the relationship with the customer is strong, they will be more likely to forgive you. And now to the last part of Disney's quote, and bring their friends. Brands grow when they are bought by more people, more often, and more easily. Brands like Amazon, Coca-Cola, and Nivea are strong because of the number of customers they have. And we've seen that good experiences create brand advocates, and so more people are drawn into the brand. They then give it a try, and if their experiences are good and in line with expectations, they too become customers, and so the brand grows. Now, when we talk about these customer experiences, we're not just talking about the obvious things like buying it, interacting with a sales agent, or making a return on a purchase. We're also talking about the higher order relational needs of enjoyment, belonging, certainty, fair treatment, control, and status. Our work with Ipsos behavioral sciences team shows that these aspects, which we call the forces of CX, are the key building blocks of brand relationship. And in our latest work, it's really interesting to see how these areas both influence and are influenced by brand perceptions. This means that when we put perceptions and experience together, we can create specific strategies that will achieve brand growth, which is really exciting. So if brands are to align their promise and delivery successfully, measurement of this is crucial. When the brand promise and the delivery are aligned, we found that brands are in a position of strength. And those that are over-delivering have opportunities for further brand growth. However, what we've seen is that when there's a promise delivery gap, we typically see that the brand KPIs are weaker. And a final note from me, if you want to know more about aligning brand promise and experience for business success, take a look at our new paper, Bridging the Brand Experience Gap, which will be released tomorrow. And back over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you very much, Catherine. That was very, very eloquent, and it's interesting to see in the feedback you got from from the work we've done how good experiences is often linked to simplifying, making my life easy. That came out very clearly. It was interesting to see, and I was wondering if you had any experience that had changed your attitude towards any brand, like in the recent past.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll give you the short story because it's a long story. And when coronavirus hit last year in South Africa, we were put under very strict lockdowns. And I would have to admit, I was rather terrified of going out to do my grocery shopping. The online shops never had exactly what I needed. So I decided to try a new store that had opened up relatively close to home. People had been raving about it on social media, and so I decided to give it a try. And I have to say that they completely surpassed all my expectations. And I'm a completely committed shopper now. I'm there every Saturday or Sunday morning, very early. And I have to say that my behavior has changed completely. And I now spend about 90% of my monthly grocery bill at this particular store, purely because of the experiences I've had.
What's different about that experience? Are you able to say something?
Oh, absolutely. From the ambience to the spaciousness, to the staff who are incredibly friendly and helpful. And even one Sunday morning, I got up early and it was raining outside. And when I had finished my shop, they even gave me a bunch of flowers to say thank you for shopping here.
Wow, that's great. That's a nice shop to visit if anyone is in Cape Town. Great. Thank you very much, Catherine. For those stories, and now we're going to fly to Sao Paulo, and we're going to pass the floor to Cynthia, who's going to tell us about women influencers in Brazil and the difference they're making for brands and for people. Over to you, Cynthia.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. Cheers from Brazil. Well, today I'm here to tell about drivers of influence, and more specifically to tell you that with the most influential celebrities study that we run every year in Brazil, this year the top influencers are all women. So I will tell you briefly what are the possible reasons that leads Brazilian audience to elect them. And to understand that, it is also important to give you a bit of context. So I will show a glimpse about Brazil. So welcome to Brazil. We are a multicultural country with over 210 million people distributed in 8.5 million square kilometers in Latin America that give us different scenarios for a living, for adventure, for business and fun, and so many things. With this, we also have diversity in many aspects with immigrants and heritage from Portuguese, Japanese, Africans, Italians, Indians, and others. So when we think about people, we have a variety of skin tones also. White, yellow, mulatto, and black skin color are all part of our DNA. We are mixed, but the majority here is over 55% auto-declaring that the skin tone is mulatto or black color. So to show you a bit of how do we look like, as I said, we are a population mixed with many cultures, and that is why we have so many faces and types to represent us. Well, if you look at me, I am half Chinese, half Brazilian, and my parents are descended from Portuguese and Indians. Thus, I am 100% Brazilian, as you can see. So diversity should be in our DNA, but as every country has its history, we all know that unfortunately it's not that simple. So when we look at Brazil today during the pandemic, besides the health and economic crisis, the pandemic has also exposed the inequality and the lack of inclusion. And among the vulnerable groups, those related to gender and racial issues were the most impacted, and Brazil is above global average in these matters. So these are topics that never been so important. The number of feminicides raised with families in lockdown. In the labor market, the unemployment is higher among Black and mulattoes versus white people. And last not least, when everyone turns on their TV and devices, brands show up with advertising that brings still small representation, as my colleague Gio already explored. Thus, this is pretty much the context that we are living here and how consumers are responding to all that. Well, consumers are asking for help. Bringing to the business context, the audience expects brands to be more empathetic, more human, and embrace causes that promote positive impact to society. More than ever, consumers are plugged and they are interested in hearing from brands. In Brazil, they trust more in brand actions than the government or politics. So they feel it lacks strong representations. And when we mean representation, we are talking about a strong voice to be capable of changing the situation. And this is pretty much where the celebrity also can play a role in society. So when we think of celebrities influencers, they study revealed a top 5 ranking marked by women only. There are 5 talented women that speak out loud that own strong identification with consumers from Black skin color to Northeast region representation, or even defending a cause like Gisele Bündchen that uses her presence, her fame to promote impact in the sustainability cause. So when we look at this ranking elected by the Brazilian online audience, it tells a lot about the need for attention on representation and gender equality that society is asking for. And this woman have strong characteristic that goes beyond skin tone and that make them eligible for the top influencer position. So in this study, we find out 9 dimensions that help us to understand the power of this influence based on the strength of the person in 40 attributes. And then we found out that there are two dimensions that are the most important, and they are related to personal achievements, which gave them success and trust to speak up. So these 5 celebrities we saw are indeed trustable, they succeed in what they do, and they use this power for the good of society and consumers. So to give you some example of what I am saying about these personalities, Isa, that is the top influencer, is a singer that planned her career, and she has always aimed to be inspirational and to be able to represent the population the best way possible in issues related to gender and racial equality. So she is very transparent regarding attitudes, and for every contract that she signs with a brand, she analyzes if it makes sense to her and to the cause she's related. So in this way, brands, when choosing personalities just like Isa, tend to benefit exposing values that consumers respect and feel close to the brand. And another one that worth comment is Juliette Freire. Juliette is a phenomenon coming from the Big Brother program. That is a reality show that exposes a lot about the personality of the participants, as you may know. She owns a very authentic human story. She's clever, funny, and she nowadays has almost 30 million followers on the Instagram. And she has been using all this fame to promote the Northeast as an example of strong women, breaking stereotypes and bringing the diversity as well. So with that, linking all this to our business, the key messages that I want to leave to you is that first, there's a clear opportunity for brands to make good use of celebrity influencers. Second, consumers are expecting brands, companies, and celebrities' voices and attitudes to help them, so be relevant. And with that, we know that brands can really make a difference. So if you wish to understand how to better choose the representative or influencers for the brand, we can send further info about the methodology, and I'll be happy to help you with this on this journey. So I leave my email as well. Thank you, and over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you very much, Cynthia, for taking us on this little trip into the world of influencers in Brazil. And I was wondering, also from you, I'd love to have a little personal note. Is there any influencer that has had sort of any meaningful impact on you, and why?
Isa, Yvette Sangalo, they are really inspiration for my personal life. I have 2 girls as well, and they are starting to understand what a few brands have to offer, and they watch TV, YouTubers. They know all these girls and other topics that goes beyond the artistic environment. So 2 years ago, we saw the first spacewalk done only by female astronauts, and I showed this to them. So they are looking at powerful women standing out, and this make them truly believe that they can do everything. I think this movement is certainly changing the future for the next generation. So it's a good thing for my daughters.
That sounds very exciting. And so there's lots of daughters on this panel. And I see that we're preparing the future generation of astronauts, which is very nice to hear. So thank you so much for sharing all your experience and your data and your insights from around the world to all the panelists. And thank you so much to everyone who was with us today. And we obviously look forward to seeing you again at our next webinar in a few weeks' time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.